Looks like you're ready. Click here to start streaming. Go live. All right, Rob, here we go.
All right.
I had to do it on my end. Boom. All right, we are live on YouTube. Coach Rob Jacobs, welcome from Atlanta, Georgia. How you doing?
Oh, man, I'm doing great. How you doing?
Very good. Very good. I did a little digging, and I know we had a quick chat before we got on, but I did a little digging of your social media. And this just happens to be where I am in the house. So I have these guitars in the background, but you're a guitar player yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I started, when I was 14 or 15. I remember it like it was yesterday. So it was a Monday night. And for some reason, Monday Night Raw and I think Nitro were both delayed for some reason.
Nice. And
I saw the Stevie Ray Vaughan Legends on VH back when they actually played, music related things.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know if you've ever seen the program or not, but he was doing Life Without You on the riverboat.
Yeah.
And that was just like the greatest thing still the greatest thing I've ever heard. That song, that version of that song.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed with his music. Even at that point, I was into blues and all the old stuff anyway.
Yeah.
But that moment, it's like, I don't know who this guy is, but I have to find out everything about him and everything about his music. And then just kind of went from there. My dad actually had to kind of talk me into playing. He was like, yeah, come on, we'll get you a guitar. We'll get you lessons. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And, a year or so later, we just ran with it.
That's cool. I didn't know Stevie Ray got you into guitars. He's really, if I had to pick just one guy, he'd be the guy that I would have to listen to for the rest of my life. And
absolutely. Yeah.
But I didn't start playing till I was 22. I was after college.
Oh, wow.
So guys like you, obviously when we're younger, they say you can learn languages easier and things stick in your memory better. And I always feel like, dang it, I missed out on learning young when the brain's still developing. But I remembered once I got into the blues and playing, Stevie Ray stuff and Robert Cray and Clapton and Page and all those guys. Warren Haynes is one of my favorite guys, but I had listened to him not on purpose, but the gym that I went to when I was in high school playing ball, the owner there was a chiropractor and he always had Stevie Ray Vaughan on. I'm like, who is this old blues guy? I thought it was this, 60, 65-year-old black guy. And turns out it's this 30-year-old white guy who just has all this soul. You know what I mean? So cool. So cool.
Yeah, he was unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm going to read your bio for those of you people who don't know who you are. As an international lecturer and coach and published author, Robert Jacobs has spent the past 20 years as a strength and conditioning coach, coaching professional athletes, physique and bikini competitors, strongman competitors, title holders and world champions in mixed martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and judokas for Team USA. Robert has worked with a diverse range of athletes, coaching Olympians and medalists in the sports of soccer, national champions in track and field, and NFL athletes from the Bengals, the Giants, and the Vikings. Proudly, he has coached over 31 athletes in multiple sports to NCAA Division I scholarships. Robert has been coached and mentored privately by the late Charles Poliquin. Rest in peace, Charles. He has spent years studying directly under Charles and other acclaimed coaches like Lawrence Seagrave in the track and field world, Boris Shako in powerlifting, Judd Logan in track and field, Derek Woodsky, Andre Benoit, and functional medicine doctors, Dr. Robert Silberman and Dr. Bob Rakowski. Throughout his time coaching, Robert has also spent time as a head coach for track and field events like the hurdles, triple jump, and long jump. He is currently an active strongman competitor who has competed at the USS National Championships. So, needless to say, and my focus is basketball. I love working with basketball athletes. I played basketball myself. It's a sport that I think is way behind the times in terms of training. Anytime I see basketball players, they're, running through the little ladders and running around cones. And it's always essentially speed work, or at least what they think is speed work. Right. And so I'm always talking about, and I hear my children yelling, I'm always talking about the guys that Charles was always talking about from the 60s and the 70s. And even before that really said, we need to develop strength. We need to get strength here. And then just use this little 3-week, 4-week, 5-week block right before to really maximize that power and that speed and that athleticism. And so, I said all that, but if there's one person that can help in the field of basketball for athletes, with the pedigree, with the track record, with the experience. It's you. So thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
And you know, the topic that we kind of wanted to hit on was 5 exercises, but you being, you know, a expert in your craft, you came with a lot more. So I'm just going to hand over the reins to you and let you run with it and, you know, do your thing.
All right. So we'll share the presentation here. As like we talked about with the guitar, I'm a very visual learner. So anytime I had to get all of the concerts at Stevie that I could find and all the bootleg shows.
Oh yeah.
And that's how I taught myself to play, was just, you know, watching and listening.
Oh yeah.
So basketball is an interesting animal. That's actually the first sport that I had the chance to be the head coach of for the feeder teams for the high schools. So it's it's interesting to come from a background of starting that before I actually really knew anything technical about strength and conditioning, and knowing, you know, what we did and
right,
you know, running an offense and the demands on some of the players. So hopefully this will be coming from an actual sport coach's perspective, from the strength and conditioning perspective, and knowing a lot of the flaws involved in the training. So see if I can get this presentation going. Of course, it's not working. Try to reshare this here. The beauties of live broadcasts.
I feel most people are prepared for these things nowadays. With the last year and a half and Zoom, people are like, they're willing to put up with a lot more nowadays.
Yeah. We'll make sure the content's worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, when we start looking at the best exercises for the sport, you kind of have to look at, you know, what you're dealing with most of the time. Obviously there's no 5 exercises for every person,
right?
But by and large, you know, when a basketball player comes in, they got weak VMOs, they got weak hamstrings, they got weak neck extensors, and you see a ton of ankle injuries, probably more ankle injuries, you know, even the knee injuries. But like with the neck extensors now, all the kids, but also a lot of these guys that are so tall, they spend their lives looking down.
Right.
And you know, even a guy that's that tall, or just my height, like 6'3", if you're not a very confident guy, they don't stand up very tall anyway. You know, right. I catch myself a lot of times just, you know, not peacocking and just kind of relaxing. So that weak neck extensor thing is a big component that needs to be addressed. And a lot of that's in the structural side of things. But, you know, the exercises that we're going to choose, these are the main targets of those exercises that we have to really strive to improve on. So when we look at what the actual, you know, the upper echelon of the sport thinks is important, right? You got bench press of 185 for reps. There's 2 different types of vertical jumps at the NBA Combine, one with a running start and then just a standing vertical jump like they do in the NFL Combine. They have a 3/4 court sprint, reactive pro agility, which is a little bit different than the NFL Combine, and then the lane agility drill.
Right.
So we'll spend, you know, the vast majority of our time today talking about these 3 here, the standing vertical, the 3/4 court spread, and then a little bit on the running start, because there's a little bit of a different perspective on that exercise. So the big 5 that I chose, now obviously, you know, coming from Charles being my main inspiration and main driver of everything strength and conditioning, is picking the best bang for your buck exercises.
Yep.
So the snatch, grip, deadlift, the multiple forms of squatting, standing good mornings, chin-ups, and from the strongman perspective, loaded carries. The more I get deeper into strongman, the more I realize the value in the loaded carries, and even the transfer of things like the log power cleans, log muscle snatches, essentially really transfer to teaching athletes triple extension. My background in strength and conditioning started with Olympic weightlifting. So, you know, not all of us are confident or comfortable enough at our proficiency in teaching those lifts to get a kid good enough at them. But the log really allows you to back off of how technical Olympic lifting can be and still get that fast Olympic lifting component with an implement that's much easier, and your returns are a little higher in terms of your risk to rewards. So, you know, I've got some of the subset of these exercises here with the clean grip deadlift and the Olympic pulls, which we'll get into. But when you look at the data and really look at something like the vertical jump, you can really see the muscle group specific things where some of these exercises really target, you know, these lifts.
Well, the loaded carry thing, that's a very Dan John thing of you to say. I don't know if you follow Dan John. I follow him a little bit. But Charles always talked about that too. Like you mentioned, where with those loaded carries and the other strongman lifts, they really directly can affect your squat almost immediately. I remember Charles saying in class one time. And I think those loaded carries, just for overall global strength and just being, globally strong, I think are so important that many people just overlook them.
Yeah. So like I'll use myself as an example because there's a substantial discrepancy because my back issues. My best yoke carry for time is 625 pounds, I believe, for 60 feet. Mm-hmm. But best back squat is not much over 400 pounds. And, if you don't think that having 620 pounds on your back can improve your back squat, you're very mistaken.
Right. Right.
That is definitely going to have some transfer. And when we look at a sport like basketball with ankle injuries, right? Carrying a load like that, whether you make your athletes carry barefooted or, really just carrying a load that's more than you can squat will have some ankle transfer issues. Because if you got weak ankles, you're not going to be able to carry,
right,
the weight you can squat or 1.5 times the weight you can squat. So
yep.
In that aspect, we'll see how much the glute actually carries over. But with these loaded carries, right, it's not just the trunk aspect and the abs and a lot of the guys in our world really only attack the strongman exercises from the modified strongman training body composition aspect. But, when I, Charles, we trained for strongman. So we got a really nice perspective on how he uses strongman exercises for strongman and not just body composition. So there's a strong carryover there just to be an overall strong athlete. If I'm a 4 or a 5 or anywhere near the post and I can carry twice my body weight on my back, somebody that's my size and not as strong as me is not going to move me around for a rebound. I'm going to have dominance in that position. And it goes for all the guys too, for all the positions on the floor too.
Cool.
All right. So when we break we'll start with the vertical jump. When we break that down and actually look at the components and the muscle groups, Charles did a really great job of breaking this down. The glutes or the posterior chain really is the biggest contributor, right? The glutes contributing 40%, hamstrings 25%, erectors 15%, and even the shoulders. I know you had a really good article that emphasized the shoulders and how important the shoulders are in vertical jump. And a lot of people look at this, it's like the quads only contribute 5%. Like, give me a break. But if you watch someone vertical jump, 9 times out of 10, they barely bend their knees, right? Your ass and your hips are way stronger than just your quads. So, these numbers do hold true. So you want to spend more time building up those weak links. But when you start to get into these structural lifts and just analyzing how this specific athlete or this specific client jumps, if they jump with their quads and they're weak in the quads, you build up their quad strength. Or if they need to build up their posterior chain. So there's, the numbers are a suggestion to kind of guide you, but it's like we can see here that the arm swing can increase the height by 28% and the takeoff by 72%, right? That's huge. And a lot of people don't think about that. And, that's one component that makes learning how to do an exercise like the snatch so valuable is it's practicing, the arm drive much more so than the incline presses. But so there's a lot more carryover to this than just fucking jumping. The amount of time I see people just jumping and jumping and jumping, it's like, and even in season, right? Like this kid's going to basketball practice 4 or 5 days a week, and you're going to have him come in and jump for a record and for max effort. Like, give me a break. It makes no sense.
I use the analogy in my group a lot when I'm talking and doing these presentations about, if you buy a race car and you go and run a quarter mile and then keep running a quarter mile and expecting the time to get better without doing any modifications to the engine or the exhaust or whatever, like, what do you think's going to happen? Like, you got to get the stronger engine. You got to do, build this, build that. Like, it's wacky to me that people just keep jumping and keep sprinting, thinking things will improve.
Yeah. Sure. I don't think anybody's put it better than Charlie Francis. Like his example was the closer you get to your competition, the farther away from those demands your training should be. Right. Yeah. So, like volleyball and basketball, if I know my kid's going to jump upwards of 100 times during a game, we're probably going to stop jumping
Right.
pretty soon, pretty soon. So he doesn't do that. It's not going to help him.
Right.
So much like our mentor would do, I broke this down into kind of a principled approach because it always made a lot of sense to me. So a few principles for improving the vertical jump. And as we saw, the top three biggest components muscularly are posterior chain related. So vertical pulling is the fastest way to improve the vertical jump. And again, there we see the numbers: 40% for the glutes, 25% for the hamstrings. And as you well know, the hamstrings are both an extensor of the posterior chain or the hips and a flexor of the knee. So we'll want to train those both ways. And then with the erectors there, and then again, the shoulders. So principle number 2 is to improve the predictor lifts for the vertical jump. Now, the best predictor lifts that I've found, obviously coming from Charles, are the power snatch, the front squat, the incline press, and the long range power snatch. Now, if you like to think about your average post player and how long their arms are, the long range power snatch is a very long range power snatch.
Right.
You can imagine to be able to get 90% of your power snatch in the long range is a lot of speed. So I would encourage anyone that isn't competent in lifts like the power snatch or the long range power snatch to seek out someone that can teach you how to do that, because quite honestly, it's not complicated. Charles, you say you could teach somebody how to do it good enough in about 5 minutes. And I didn't believe him at first, but it's pretty simple. You got to work a little bit harder at it to master it, right? But I don't need a basketball player to have an Olympic quality power snatch. It needs to be good enough that he can do the lift safely and efficiently, but it doesn't have to be as great as a competitive Olympic weightlifter.
The basketball players listening, what is a lift that is a prerequisite that you would like to see competent and even strong in before doing the power snatch?
The snatch grip deadlift. So if we go back to that list of our 5 key exercises, that's the power snatch starts. Right. If you can't snatch grip deadlift properly, right now, a lot of times because these guys have such tight ankles or tight calves, because those, the tendons can be super long. You see somebody do a snatch grip deadlift and their ass is just as high off the ground as they are with a regular deadlift. It's not a snatch grip deadlift. You're defeating the purpose of the exercise. So, and oftentimes with these guys who have super long limbs, the snatch grip deadlift is actually easier to increase their ankle and knee range of motion than it is with their squat, just because you can kind of let the weight pull you down a little bit and combine work with that.
Smart, yep.
But if you suck at the snatch grip deadlift, you have no business power snatching. So that and that's a big problem with a lot of some of the young coaches, right? Like I know when I heard numbers like this, like, well, shit, all we're going to do is power snatch and get good at that, because we can do 12 weeks of power snatching and various progressions. But a predictor lift is only an improvement of performance. So all you need is a baseline and an endpoint. If the power snatch got better, then they'll probably jump higher, right? And that's how these predictor lifts aren't everything that you need to base training around. Dave Tate had a brilliant way of putting this, right? Is you have your primary lift, your accessory lift drives the primary, and then your supplementary lift drives the accessory that drives the primary. But using that powerlifting concept is very rarely will they ever squat, bench, or deadlift just like they do in a competition, right? Because those lifts take it out of you. And so with these 3 in particular, not so much the long range snatch because you can't lift as much on it, but with the power snatch, the front squat, and the incline press, even when I have somebody that's perfectly proficient in all 3 of these, we might do it for 2 out of 4 phases, right? Probably just the one. We'll get some numbers before we start. So the predictor lifts aren't all 12 weeks. Like that's a big problem in the coaching world. Is just, what's a predictor lift for this? What's a predictor lift for that? Start with the snatch grip deadlift. And if you can't power snatch, if your snatch grip deadlift goes up 10 kilos in the course of 3 weeks, your jump's going to go up. None of my strongman guys jump. And one of the guys at the gym randomly tested his vertical jump, and it was better than most of the these basketball kids that are in there jumping 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
So it transfers. You don't have to constantly do one thing to be good at it. You just have to do it enough to be proficient at it.
So you mentioned predictor lift, and I know we know what that is. I really try to dumb things down because again, with basketball players, I see them leg pressing and I see them running through ladders. Like, so what is a predictor lift? I know it's right there in the name, but just briefly run through that. And then what would be a great one, and I know we're talking about them for the vertical jump, but what would be a great predictor lift or two for basketball in general?
So the concept of the predictor lift is an exercise that when you see improvement in that particular exercise, it should translate to improvement on the court in this case, or on the field, depending on what your sport is. So when we're isolating basketball down to the vertical jump. Right. So these predictor lifts that we're talking about, to the power snatch, the front squat, the incline press, are specific to the muscle groups and the biomechanics of specifically the vertical jump. Now, if we're looking at just an overall basketball player, these lifts probably won't make up much of the training at all if I'm not centered on just getting my vertical up, right? So when we regress these things back, if you regress the power snatch back to the first lift in its progression, it would be the snatch grip deadlift. So, for anyone, if you could pick one lower body exercise that would transfer to the most qualities for the most people, that would probably be the snatch grip deadlift. It trains the upper back. It'll train those neck extensors if you're in a good position, train posterior chain extremely well. And when you get good at the snatch grip deadlift and can start doing it off a deficit or with bands and chains, then because you're increasing the range of motion, you're increasing the leg drive. So now I'm also training, the anterior muscles of the quadriceps a little bit, not as much as a squat, but if I'm only doing one exercise, that one's going to train, the most things most effectively. So as a predictor lift of performance on the court, snatch grip deadlift would definitely be on that list if we take vertical jump specifically out of the equation. That's a lift that every athlete should be proficient in, just for overall health because of so for anyone listening, if you don't really understand like the difference between the snatch grip deadlift and the clean grip deadlift, because the snatch grip deadlift is so much wider, for every inch those hands move out towards the side of the bar, your hips should be starting that much lower, right? So when we look at, when we watch you as an athlete performing a clean grip deadlift, your depth or your knee bend is probably a quarter, maybe half of a full range squat. So it's, a lot of hips, a lot of upper back, and a little bit of leg drive. But when we get to that snatch grip deadlift, you're starting, depending on how long your arms are, at parallel or below. And then we start adding some of those deficit components in, standing on podiums. Yeah. You're starting in a full range of motion squat, and like your knees are healthy and your ankles are healthy if you can do that with good weight.
I love what you said earlier about the mobility aspect too of the snatch grip deadlift and having to sit down with your hips. For me, frankly, the snatch grip deadlift and the front elevated split squat, those two alone can improve someone's mobility dramatically in those first 4 to 8 weeks, even 2 weeks, with some of these athletes. I mean, like you said, they're so tall, they're so far away from the floor. They never want to go down that low. It's difficult for them, so. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that explanation.
Yeah. So with like the power of unilateral exercises should not be underestimated, man. Like, I mean, anytime I've ever committed to putting somebody through 12 full weeks of unilateral lower body work, immediately when we start bilateral work, the numbers are better, right? The most recent example I can think of is the snatch grip deadlift was 16% better. And this guy could deadlift 400 pounds before we started unilateral work, and his snatch grip deadlift went up 16%. 12 weeks of split squats and step ups, and a lot more step ups than split squats. So depending on what the weaknesses are, right? If I've got a kid who has just horrible shifting and all these weird movements and ankle problems and knee problems, then your split squat becomes a huge predictor lift. I had a football player. We increased his broad jump by 15 inches in 12 weeks with no jumping, no explosive work, no power work, step ups and split squats, and snatch grip deadlifts. So the transfer is there, especially based on the weakness of that particular athlete, right? It's very rare that we get such a healthy specimen that we can, all right, we're going to build up this kid's power snatch the first time right out of the gate,
I've had a few basketball players come and train with me in the off season from Europe. And the one most memorable one was probably, gosh, that was 2016 maybe. But the guy comes out 7'2" actually. And again, making them, typical Charles, typical, smart training. You're off the court for a month minimum. And then after that 4 weeks of training, we get on the court. He's like, in his thick accent, he's like, my gosh, I'm like so powerful. I'm like jumping all over, blah, blah. I've never been, it's like, they don't realize, like, we're working on building your motor. We're working on improving that function and building the motor unit, the mind muscle connection. And then they get on the court and they're like, holy shit, I didn't know I could do this before. It's like, you couldn't do this before. You know what I mean? Because we got you off of that jumping. We let your joints rest. We improve the musculature. We improve that neural drive. Like, gosh, man, I just want that basketball world to wake up with proper training. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a great point, man. Like, I think what's the term, reciprocal inhibition or any type of inhibition, right? If for anybody, like, if there's players listening, right? If you have an injury, your brain is going to try to tell your body how to work around that injury and let it not affect you, right? And whether that be, all right, well, leg's going to produce less force because I'm, as a brain, I'm afraid that that's going to cause an injury. So we're going to down-regulate force production or down-regulate speed or shorten motion. So when you go through phases of split squats, like we're talking about, or anything that increases range of motion and fixes that inhibition, you've just improved your performance. Even if that's what drives me so insane about like some of these younger coaches that are just obsessed with weight room numbers. Right. Like, okay, that's great. You got a kid stronger. Any dipshit can improve your 1 rep max, right? Like, lift heavy weight, lift it all the time. Your max is going to go up. But what does that mean for that athlete? Like, that's not like the football player I was talking about. That wasn't his problem. The kid's VMOs danced all over the place when we did his clat test, when he tried to squat. It's like, this kid doesn't need to squat. He doesn't need to jump. He damn sure doesn't need to jump. So we fixed those problems, and with no jumping, right? We increased his numbers immensely. So that's
awesome.
It's not sexy, and that's the stuff that like younger athletes don't give a shit about. I mean, for that matter, the pro athletes really dislike, depending on which one you get.
Right.
But that's the stuff. I really think that's some of the stuff that made Charles so good, is that he didn't give a shit, what your power clean was if you couldn't split squat properly.
Right.
And then you fix that split squat. Oh, look at this power clean, or look at your, look at your jump. Yeah.
Woodsky, one time we had him come out and work with us. There was about 5 of us. Guys you may remember: Brad Davidson, Joey Emon, Curtis Jackson, Gary. Anyway, he drew 2 triangles on the board. I can't remember where he said he got this, but he drew 2 triangles equal height, one with a very wide base and one with a very narrow base. And then he drew a 1-inch horizontal line off the top of each triangle, and then a straight line down from that line. So if you can visualize it, on that narrow triangle, you're going to go a lot farther and fall a lot farther down the triangle, as opposed to the one with the wide base. And his point was, build a strong foundation, get really strong in all of the foundational lifts. And then if you do have an injury, or if you do miss some time or whatever, you won't go that far back down the pyramid of that big growth that you produced. I can't agree with you more. Like, basketball players are missing that foundational element of, can my knees work through a full flexion? Can my ankles, can I dorsiflex, properly? Can I even do a handful of pull-ups, at a 4:10 tempo, like even 2, some of these guys can't even do 2 or 3 pull-ups, full range of motion. So, gosh, man, that's awesome. I'm so glad you're saying this.
I used to be of the mindset that, you have a limb that's as long as a 6'8", 6'9", or even a 7-footer, that maybe it's not good for that limb to squat full range of motion. And then you see guys like Preston Green, who has all these guys squatting full range of motion, and their injury rates are down and their performance is through the roof, right? And it's like, no, the ankle joint, like, your shoe size doesn't have anything to do with what the joint's mobility should be, right? Like, every joint should have a range of motion that it's capable of to be healthy and safe. And it's just, it's rampant everywhere, unfortunately.
Right. Cool.
All right, so principle number 3. So now we'll get into some of the accessory lifts. Now these aren't the only accessory lifts, or your accessory lift is going to be determined by what your predictor lift is. So if we go back to the previous slide and I'm using a power snatch as my predictor lift, then the snatch grip deadlift, the clean grip deadlift, the back squat, those are going to be my accessory lift. That's what I'm going to concentrate on. Now, if I'm not proficient at teaching the power snatch, or my athlete can't power snatch and my deadlift becomes my predictor lift, then your accessory lifts are going to change. Right now, your accessory lift becomes reverse hyper, back extension, Romanian deadlift, standing good mornings, right? All these incredibly powerful exercises. So, that, like I said, that Dave Tate progression. So for any coaches listening, draw out those progressions, right? What's my predictor lift? What drives the predictor lift? And then what supplementary drives that accessory lift? And it really helps you bulletproof your program. And so I had on here the structural ratio. We just talked about chin-ups and how many basketball players can't do shit for chin-ups. Chin-ups should be neutral grip chin-ups should be 91% of your biochromial bench press, right? So if I can bench press 100 kilos, you should be doing a decent amount of weight for chins,
right?
And that just corresponds to healthy shoulders, strong arms, strong back. If your back muscles are weak, your erectors are going to be weaker. Your neck extensors are going to be weaker, right? It's all about that inhibitory response that we were talking about that not only governs range of motion, but it also governs strength and a lot of these predictor lifts.
Yep.
All right, principle number 4. So when you start looking at converting strength to power, the conversion from strength to power takes 3 weeks. And so when you're going through that conversion, we're no squatting, no heavy lifting, because we're trying to take strength and make it fast. And you're going to have a hard time doing heavy weight. So we look at, this is where we start to introduce jumping exercises to peak. Now, also to put this in context, right? We're talking about peaking the vertical jump test, or peaking someone's ability to vertical jump. So,
right.
That where I'm going to peak is going to depend on how often this athlete has to start jumping. So if I know they're not going to start jumping December 1st at all, or with practice, or if they're not on the court doing drills, then we can, that's where we're going to start peaking that jump at the time they have to start doing that skill.
Okay.
So when you're starting to program for peaking, it doesn't always, doesn't always coincide with, the first practice or the beginning of the season, right? Because a good athlete is going to be doing stuff not with their team, right? Like the pro athletes that come to the rack, especially the basketball players, are always on the court doing something, whether it be, drills or something, right? Or pick up.
Right.
So the amount of jumping I'm going to do is going to have to be varied with that. And when we look at the type of jumping, right, the 2 most common types are going to be a barbell on back squat jump and then a snatch grip jump. So through my assessments, and every workout is an assessment. It's not just test on day 0 and then start training on day 1. Every rep, every workout, every set should be an assessment for you as a coach on your program and your athlete. So as I'm going through these phases, these exercises, like the type of jump I'm going to do is going to be determined by what's weak. And that's where we go back to some of the structural numbers,
right?
Where you can start to compare your front squat to your back squat to your deadlift, right? Like you should be able to front squat and seated good morning the same weight for the same sets and reps, right? As a good test of leg strength and posterior chain strength. So if I know, one, if I don't have the mobility to do a proper seated good morning, well, there's a problem in my posterior chain, right?
Right.
So again, that's gonna take precedence. So you may have instances where you're not converting strength to power to peak. So if my peak exercise is snatch grip deadlift, that's not going to be a power exercise. I'm gonna be peaking general strength. So it's very important to take this information and apply it to everyone's N equals 1. Just because they're a basketball player doesn't mean they should be peaking power at the end of a 12-week block or 6-week block or whatever your training progression is.
Right.
All right. So the next one I wanted to look at was the 3/4 court sprint. So 3/4 court sprint is going to be 20 meters. And we'll talk about four key principles to improving short-term speed. And the nice part is you'll see a lot of carryover. So I can improve my 3/4 course sprint time and my vertical jump and my vertical jump with a step and my lateral shuffle drill and my reactive pro agility drill. Just by getting stronger, you improve these outcomes without having to waste so much valuable time shuffling, back and forth.
Yeah.
Or doing speed ladders like we talked about. So principle number one for short-term speed is overcoming inertia. And the two biggest muscle groups that are involved in this, and this is huge in the track and field world for any sprinter that has to come out of the blocks, is the lumbar region and the erector spinae. So again, we go back to the snatch grip deadlift. The snatch grip deadlift being the best bang for your buck to strengthen the posterior chain in general, and especially lumbar spine and the erector spinae muscles.
Right.
And so principle number two is decreasing the amortization phase. The amortization phase, if you're familiar with the 4-digit tempos, right, that's going to be the middle digit in between the eccentric and concentric contraction. And I remember once hearing Judd Logan say, like, the difference between an elite athlete and a mediocre athlete is their ability to relax and contract rapidly again, right? So that amortization phase and how fast you can go from an eccentric contraction to a concentric contraction, it is essentially your reaction time. And
right.
What we know helps that tremendously is eccentric training. So, and that's not just like 4-second eccentrics, 5-second eccentrics, but 10-second eccentrics, long, slow, eccentric contractions builds loads of strength, but it'll also help you re-accelerate. And so for decreasing the amortization phase, right, the principle number one is mostly getting off the starting line, getting out of the blocks if it's track and field. Decreasing the amortization phase is steps and how fast you can go from striking the ground to initiating the eccentric contraction of the sprint. So you decrease the amortization phase and you start working on increasing stride length, increasing stride frequency, and you're moving mass by large amounts every step of the way.
Okay.
We also have concentric training or concentric only training, and inertia squats is one of the best. But again, with the concentric only, that's a great part about a lot of these strongman exercises. There's not a prolonged eccentric component to loaded carries. If you're doing them for distance, right? A 60-foot loaded carry for me is less than 10 seconds. So that's not a lot of, there's not a lot of eccentric work. There's a lot of eccentric damage there.
For those of people who are listening now or in the future, if you go to my page, it's my #1 video on my channel, how to improve your change of direction speed. We talk extensively about eccentrics and that being the primary indicator or the predictor for change of direction, because most people don't realize they don't think about it, at least if you're going this way and you want to cross over and go this way, you have to stop going one way first. So if you can stop faster and get over this, then it just makes sense. Like if I can be in charge, if I can control, if I can be stronger eccentrically, I can brake before applying that, that pressure going the other way. And you just mentioned too, another thing, the concentric onlys. In that 3-week phase, again, I've talked about that. Very Tudor Bompa of you. I love it. That's the whole point, like build from strength. And then just this small little less than a month window to really, power up. Is that when you put in your concentric only training, or where would you put that in an athlete's phase, an athlete's training program?
That's,
I know that could be a lot of answers. So
I've started using it a lot more early on. And I think one of the things that I sort of let dictate my training methodology is how often I'm going to have the athlete. Okay. So if I'm fortunate enough to get somebody 4 times a week, which I've been pretty fortunate with, then I fall into more of a traditional parameters where that's going to be more towards the end of a peaking, the peaking phase, probably weeks 7 through 9, and then peaking weeks 10, right? So because you're going to build strength through the concentric only work and work on that amortization shortening. And then the next phase would be where you would start not demonstrating that, but doing exercises that lead more towards that. So that's where your jumping exercises come in. You may have an exercise where you just do 10 sets of different types of jumps, and then that's it.
Right.
Like I said, no squatting. But when I find an athlete that I can only get 2 to 3 times a week, I actually use more of the omni contraction method. So there'll be a day focused on eccentric, a day focused on isometric, a day focused on concentric. And I find that especially in the younger athletes, the midpoint between young and not having a clue about where their body is, and a high school athlete that's lifted, or that's a good athlete but just never lifted before. And I find that helps a ton, because it allows me to increase my exercise frequency.
Cool.
So I can squat every day. I can bench, almost every workout. I can pull every workout. And it's less boring for the athlete, because there's a little bit of variation. You're not doing the same thing every workout, and then you're training all of those qualities. You have to be a little bit specific with it, but just a deadlift with a fast eccentric and resetting on the platform is good concentric only work.
Right.
Now, also sleds are great concentric only work, right? So just because we mentioned the inertia squat doesn't mean that that's the only type of concentric only exercise that we'll use, right? Like, especially for recovery. But yeah, again, the phase 3 out of a 4-phase cycle, but maybe a little more often because when I'm using it with a younger athlete, right? If I have a kid doing squats 3 days a week, a concentric only squat is not going to hinder their ability to learn how to squat. The 9-second eccentric we did on Monday and the isometric pauses we did on Wednesday are going to teach them how to squat. And then that exercise on Friday, if they have practice on the weekends, which is what we run into a lot, is I hit the concentric work towards the end of the week where they can't afford to be as fatigued from training. And it still allows us to dictate, right? If I know the kid's knees get weak towards the top quarter of their squat, then that's where our concentric squat's going to be.
Yeah.
I had a soccer player yesterday. We were doing concentric only front squats, and we were about an inch above 90 degrees. So very low for an inertia squat. And because that's where she has problems in her squat. So it's teaching an athlete how to squat better. And squatting 2 other days during the week, it's certainly not detracting from their ability to learn, right? Training to learn how to train at that age. And
I don't think people realize too, the most damage that you're going to do in terms of, which type of, type of contraction is eccentric. So, you can't do a 9-second eccentric squat 2, 3, 4 times a week. It's not going to happen. You're going to hurt yourself. So, I like how you do that, where there's the Omni style is wonderful.
Yeah. And so like with the developmental athletes I've seen, and when I say developmental, I mean, for 13 to 15, 13 to 16,
right.
It's increased performance immensely. Like I had just a kid yesterday who floor pressed a weight that he couldn't bench 2 weeks before, completely failed on it. So his one rep max strength on the bench press went up 22.5 pounds in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, the kid's 14, 15. So their improvements are going to be much more pronounced than, yours or mine, but still 23-pound improvement in 2 weeks, not benching is huge, right? And it's attribute that to this variable contraction method, because we're squatting 3 times a week. We're pressing 3 times a week. We're pulling 3 times a week, posterior chain work 3 times a week. And so I find that omni contraction system is a great way to start to increase, like I said, the exercise frequency without having the athlete just bored out of their mind, doing the same workout 3 days in 3 weeks, 3 times a week. Like, that's awful. It sucks for me as a coach, and nobody enjoys that. It's not any fun.
Right. Cool.
All right. So principle number 3, and this one comes from Preston Green. You can make an elastic guy powerful, but you can't make a powerful guy elastic. And one of the best ways to determine this is with a vertical jump test, right? So you can test your vertical jump with a counter movement, and then test the vertical jump in a quarter squat or static, however your athlete jumps, and see which one is better. So you'll know what your athlete's lacking. And then when you combine stuff like that with the neurotransmitter profiles, you can really see if they're how they thrive, but also what they need, right? So if I have this essentially tells me who will get more from harder, heavier strength work and who should or will get more from more power work, fast work.
Now, Stefan Cazzola, I remember he mentioned it was the way he does that test is you do the counter movement jump, mark it, then he does a paused squat jump, the 3-second pause to eliminate all of that, potential energy. And that's how he differentiates it. Do you do it from a complete, you said sitting position, even like just sitting on a box?
No, I like to figure out how they jump, right? So
okay.
You want to do your counter movement jump first, because what you don't want to do when you're testing this, right, is if my athlete squats down, I don't know, here, I don't want to do their static jump in a position
correct, yeah,
that they're never going to jump in. It defeats the purpose of comparing, right? So, you take a video of their counter movement jump and then figure out, okay, this is how they jump. They jump okay. The way they jump doesn't need correction. All right, this is the position we're going to hold. And, we know from a lot of like testing work, Louis Simmons talks about this all the time is, so-and-so can sit on a box for 4 or 5, 6 seconds and produce just as much force coming off of that box, right? So not be any slower, not be any weaker, not be any different. So if I put you in the position that you already have told me you like to jump in and are good at jumping in,
right?
Jump as well, then okay, well, we found our problem. Too much stretch reflex. We got to build strength instead of power, and this kid should get a little bit better. And then, when you start to analyze the neural stuff along with that, you can sort of know that before you actually know it just by looking at the neural, because that neural component is going to tell you what they gravitate more towards.
Right. So
how do I take what they like and enhance what they need?
Totally. Cool.
And principle number 4 is you use splits to determine your training progression. So, we're the 3/4 course sprint's 20 meters. So we'd set up timers. If you have enough, you'd set up a timer every 5 meters. And so when you analyze your splits, your 0 to 10 meter times, obviously like we talked about in the other principles, are going to determine your lower back strength work. If they're a strong starter, they're not going to need as much lower back work because they're pretty good at that. So you're going to, look elsewhere. So and then when I look at my 10 to 20 meter time, a little bit longer, that's can also tell you what their unilateral work. It's usually if you're sprinting 40 to 60 meters, 15 to 30 to 40, that's going to kind of indicate how well the unilateral work worked for you because of the time under tensions that you use unilateral work for, as opposed to something you would use the snatch grip deadlift for. So if the athlete has a strong and a fast 0 to 10 meters, your range of motion is going to be a little different, right? I'm going to start that athlete with a longer range of motion, and they'll peak more towards shorter ranges because they're already good at the long range. So I'm not going to, apex their program with a range that they're really good at. Now, if they're a slow starter and finish better than they start, right, comparing my splits, then you'll work more from short to long because they'll want to be peaking that long range work. So that's again the guy who might not be peaking with a power snatch. That's the guy who might be peaking with a snatch grip deadlift from a podium, starting with rack pulls, just below his knee.
That's awesome. And I hadn't seen that, breaking down the 0 to 10, 10 to 20 meters. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that we can take from the track and field world and start to apply here, right? Because if you just break down the positions you see your athlete in, it'll indicate for you, right? If I'm 15 to 20 meters in, I'm no longer with basketball players, they're no longer accelerating, right? They're upright. Now with a elite level track athlete, they're going to be accelerating for hopefully upwards of 20 meters. So these distances are going to change a little bit based on 100 meter sprint, 400 meter sprint, all that stuff. Well, the basketball player, these guys are done accelerating, after about 10 meters, because that's just not what their sport is. So you can really start to analyze their positions and figure out what works for them and, what's weak or what's not.
Well, what I do too, so, a lot of my teaching, training with the basketball players is getting them strong and powerful, because the plays in basketball that make money, that win games, are in 0 to 5 meters, right? After 5 meters, I start talking about, okay, is their sagittal hamstring tight? Because I find that will obviously hinder top speed. Do you go into the mobility work with this? And I tend to lean towards FMS and then maybe ART, as well as just working through full range of motion stuff. But does the mobility aspect come into this with this 3/4 court sprinting for you, or full court sprinting, and basically anytime after 5 meters? And how do you train that into your athletes?
Yeah, so the mobility aspect is like probably top of the food chain on the priority list, right? So,
Right.
And that goes back to the inhibitory stuff that we talked about before. Is coming from a track coach background, I'm confident in my ability that I can, more so with the 40-yard dash, right? And in the NFL, Dave Lawrence and I and some of the other guys have had some really good discussions on this. It's like, yeah, yes, strength will make you faster, but if I can make you stronger and improve your technique, you're going to get faster than the guy who only got stronger.
Right.
And it definitely doesn't work in the reverse. If I improve your technique, you're probably not going to get that much faster than the guy who only got stronger. The problem is we'll see people working on some of these skills that our strength coaches have no fucking clue how to teach someone, not only how to start, but how to actually what a cycle of sprinting should look
Right.
like.
Right.
But so coming from track and field, coaching sprinters, but more importantly, coaching the jumps, right? It really transfers, especially the triple jump, to what a basketball player needs. But back to reciprocal inhibition. The athlete is not going to go through their motions, right? Their stride cycle optimally if there's a mobility restriction somewhere, whether it be, one of the hamstrings, whether it be in the ankle, whether it be in the hip, whatever that is going to be slowing down or limiting their force production. So this is what makes assessments so valuable right? Like we all know everyone's going to get a little bit better if they get a little bit stronger. It's a no-brainer. But the beauty of Charles's methodology and anybody in that realm is they could get so much result in such a short time by doing some of these things, like some of the results I was talking about earlier, like with the football player with his broad jump, that was huge. Like this is a 25-year-old kid that's been lifting weights for 10 years. That's not newbie gains, right? That's his horribly weak VMOs being, his nervous system inhibiting his body not to be able to perform because of injury. I mean, this kid was fast, super fast before he started, and we were still able to make these improvements. So underestimating that mobility component is it happens too much. And that's why I place a lot of improvement on being able to squat full range. Now, when you look at full range of motion squatting, it actually doesn't transfer as well as partial range squatting does to some sports, right? Especially track and field and football. But even with basketball, you very rarely will an athlete find themselves in an ass to grass position on the court. But the benefit to those moves is being, competent and strong in a full range position, so that if something happens, your body knows how to handle that or how to respond to that. If your knee happens to go past your toe,
which it does often,
right, all the time, right? Yeah. All the time. So when you train that, or you train the ability to be protected, it's a huge component. So, you're like, my goal is for everyone to be able to walk in before they start warming up and squat ass to grass, no weight, or do an ass to grass split squat without their heel coming up or any of that stuff. So that's, and that's where all this stuff has to start. Younger coaches that I've talked to before will be so obsessed with the predictor lift concept that they don't realize, like, okay, this kid can't break parallel on a squat with his body weight.
Right.
So the squat component of his predictor lifts is now null and void.
Right.
Right. I think a general rule we used to use was being able to do a barbell on back full range of motion split squat with your body weight for 8 reps with a 3-second eccentric before you're into bilateral squatting. And I mean, if you're strong enough to do that, you're going to be a good jumper, right? Your knees are going to be bulletproof. Your back's going to be pretty damn strong because it's an awful position to hold for 8 reps with your body weight. So that, that should be first and foremost. And, I'll do the overhead squats are great. FMS is a good mobility tool too.
I'm sorry. I said FMS. I meant FST. Like, I agree with you about the mobility, where you got to get full range of motion. Like, that's imperative, which I'm sure you've had it too. I've had a couple, different high school kids come in. I squatted 300 the other day. I squatted, show me. And the one girl, she has her school record. She just signed Division I a couple of weeks ago. She's going into her senior year basketball this year. Had a 280 pound or whatever it was, something like that squat. She could only do 65 pounds, the bar and a 10 on each side, all the way down and up. So it's so important. But if you have a person who can't, who even with the mobility, you think they still have some restrictions. Do you like FST? Do you go somewhere else? An ART is, PIMPS or whatever, they call it nowadays, where are you going if you need extra mobility work besides just full range of motion?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that has to start with the tissue work of some sort, right? So as a coach, learning the ability to be able to do and to know enough to help facilitate a session, right? Like, I can't train anyone for anything, but I can facilitate improved range of motion. So FST is awesome. ART is awesome. All of those modalities. I mean, as crappy as I think most of their material is, the corrective exercise specialist certification for NASM, that was one of the first ones I got, in the early 2000s. Even that had a good bit of value in, all right, we've got a shift going this way. That means this muscle's overactive, this muscle's underactive. If I can release or dampen the overactive muscle, the under, that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So if you're not educated enough to put your hands on someone, please don't.
Right.
But there's a really important component to that in seeing a mistake, right? And that's a lot of what I use in my assessment when I do mobility assessments. I find a problem. All right, let's see if I can do something, PIMPS or kinetic chain enhancement, right? To fix that problem. Then that means, all right, we're gonna scrape your jaw to increase your hamstring length before every session, and then after a couple of sessions, you've got improved hamstring length. And the ability to do that kind of thing with body tempering now is becoming much more easily accessible. And the education for doing body tempering properly is easily accessible. And the little kabuki things with the boomstick and some of that stuff and the guns. I forgot about the massage guns, right? Like, there's so many easily applicable modalities that don't really have, where your knowledge of doesn't have to hold you back. Like I use the massage gun with a lot of the PIMPS points and a lot of the acupressure points to get more out of the massage gun. So obviously the more tools you have in your toolbox,
right?
Because when somebody just does this kind of crap with that massage gun, it's like, probably going to feel a little bit better. But when you can start putting some of these pieces together, if I can do the massage gun here and here, or some other point, right? Like, I don't have anybody that can do it on myself. So the massage gun on the PIMPS point or the acu point tends to work really well. And now, like, systems like RPR are designed for the athlete to be able to do it to themselves in less than 5 minutes. There's tons of benefits to these things. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So, like, those are some of the best continuing education things for people to get into, because I mean, just if you're a coach from a sales perspective, right? A kid comes in with his mom and he's like, my knees hurt. All right, okay, show me your squat. Okay, well, no wonder your knees hurt. We do this squat. Oh, my knees don't hurt when I do that anymore. Okay, let's see what we just did in 12 minutes. Imagine what we can do in 12 weeks.
Yep.
And your things like that are why something so simple like a split squat can get such dramatic results so fast. Like I was telling one of my interns one time, anyone can get results, but what is the rate of those results you can get, right? If I can get 12 weeks of results in 3 to 4 weeks, that puts me light years ahead of my competition.
Yeah.
And my athletes ahead of their competition,
I agree.
All right. Well, that's all the slides I had put together for us.
Cool. Love it.
If you want to go through any questions or take any questions, I'm not sure what we have.
Yeah. I'm looking on YouTube now. I don't have any specific questions regarding exercises. One person just wants to make sure it is here after we are over, because he missed the beginning and wants to get the beginning. So again, the title was a bit misleading, but let's go back. Just recap. I love one of the favorite things again, and there was 1,000 of them that Charles did, is after every session, what are 10 things you learned? Now we don't have people that can, ask us our questions, but what are, let's even say 3, what are 3 main takeaways from this? And I'm just going to say one, because I got a chance to listen most of this time, just let you go, you know what I mean? Is the snatch grip deadlift is critical for basketball players. I think it's phenomenally important. You only solidified that talking about it. We talked about, how weak they are, neck extenders, tall guys always looking down nowadays, the texting, the, poor posture, laziness, slouching, computers and iPhones and all that. So we got to strengthen the backside, as well as, the vertical jump is 80% posterior chain. So the strength, the snatch deadlift, snatch grip deadlift, you're killing a lot of, like you said, bang for the buck. You're killing a lot of birds with just one stone. So I think the snatch grip deadlift is a key takeaway of this for anybody watching. I know you presented, but what's another 1 or 2 things you think that, things we learned, that big key takeaways?
So I always like to go back to that predictor lift concept, because a lot of these forums that we have, younger coaches are, like I said, obsessed with what's their predictor lift for this and that and this and that.
Yeah.
It's so important as a younger coach and as an athlete to also understand that your weight room achievements mean absolutely nothing if you don't get better on the field. You are not a weight room athlete. You're not an Olympic weightlifter. You're not a power lifter. You're a basketball player. You're a track athlete. You're, whatever your sport is, it's not just relegated to any of that. So, and that's where a lot of younger coaches go wrong and not applying getting someone just stupidly strong on a split squat if they need it. So that's a big one for me.
Cool. That's awesome. So how can people get a hold of you? Where are you exactly? Give your whatever you want to say about the rack, about Outlaw Strength, which is even new to me as of this week. How can people work with you? Do you work remotely? Tell the viewers that.
Yeah, so I do a lot of online coaching, mostly for coaches. Consultation. That's Outlaw Strength is basically what that is. My coaching coaches. So outlawstrength.com. And if you want to work with me in person, if you've never seen any of my videos of the Rack Athletic Performance Center, that's where I'm at in person. That's
North Atlanta, right?
Yeah, we're just outside of the city of Atlanta. It's a massive space, and there's really not much equipment available that we don't have, from strongman, and most importantly, the space to do strongman.
Yeah.
So that's my home base, and that facility is incredible. It's in impeccable shape. Ed Miller has done a phenomenal job of building that facility out, and it's just an incredible place to be.
It is beautiful. I love seeing the pictures. We do have a question that came in. How do you program in-season sessions? Would it be a total body or some upper lower splits? That's the question.
It's a great question. So it depends on how often I have the athlete, right? So obviously in season, I like one session every 5 days, depending on how demanding practices are. So, 1 to 2 sessions every 7 days, one session every 5 days. And when that's the case, it has to be a total body session. But again, it goes to the demands of the sport. So if I know my post player is doing a lot of lateral shuffling and a lot of rebounding work, right, a lot of jumping, then our exercise selection in the weight room for the lower body is probably not going to be quite as demanding as some of the upper body work. So total body sessions in our world are very undervalued because we think so much about the optimal training experience of 3 or 4 times a week and not using a total body session because you can get a more concentrated dose and make a little bit better progress with those muscle separate sessions. If I'm training once every 5 days, I have to be training total body.
And when you do those total body, I'm guessing it's even down to the C series or just a B series is the big bang movements, or are you still getting those remedial lifts in the C series? What we can break that down a little bit if you don't mind. 3
to 5 exercises, and again, that'll depend a little bit more. Like with the remedial work, it's easy to train the remedial work with quality in season. But so that has to go back to your sport, right? So I'm not going to be doing a lot of split squat, full range of motion split squats. I don't be doing a lot of them, or more importantly, VMO, like step up work, right? Because the kid's not going to be able to jump and he's going to be vulnerable. So keeping the volume lower with enough strength to maintain. One of the things I learned early on when I first started coaching there in the early 2000s was that you should be stronger at the end of the season than you were at the beginning. And that goes across all sports. So finding the minimal effective dose for one particular athlete, which is going to vary by position, right? I mean, as you well know, the energy system demands for a 1 and a 2 are going to be very different than a 3 or a 3 and a 4 if he alternates, or a 5 and a 4, or, whatever. So there's a lot of different things like that. If you got somebody that's always on the mop-up crew, you can probably train that kid a little bit harder
right
the season than you can, the guy that starts right out of the gate. So,
right.
Total body sessions are great. And then improving the weak links.
I'm constantly talking with basketball players too. Let's go to this a little bit, one more level. I'm thinking of a player that I trained 2 off seasons ago, and he's playing professionally in the Australian League. He's on a New Zealand team, I believe, this year. And he said every time he goes into the season, he goes from wherever he was in his training, which for me, we were in that, 4 to 6 range, strength, power, whatever. He always goes up to 8 reps, 10 reps, 12 reps. I'm like, dude, you're going the wrong way. Like, we're in this energy system over here. So, this guy Persian, he asked a question about in-season training. You broke down once every 5 days, 3 to 5 exercises, big bang, depends on the individual. Rep ranges, though, what would you do with your basketball players in season? So rather than rep range, let's think more about the strength quality, right? Because I can train multiple qualities in the same rep range, depending on tempos and whatnot, right? So if we go back to the legendary Charlie Francis and his vertical integration concepts, is the volumes of most things are there the entire time, just like they would be in season, but it's going to shift. So it's on you as a coach to understand the demands that this particular athlete is undergoing, right? Again, if he's on the mop-up crew and he's only playing the last 2 to 3 minutes when they're ahead by 40, our gloves are off, right? This kid may train right.
way more than once every 5 days. But if I'm training a guard who is going to be doing a lot more sprinting, right? I mean, and you can just watch the kids on the court. The guard has to sprint more than the post player. The post player just sort of lumbers around and, kind of gets where he's supposed to go. So the post player spends a lot more time doing slower, probably higher rep range work when he's on the court than somebody else. So easier to recover from concentric based exercises in lower rep range. I can work the strength speed quality, the speed strength quality, but I'm probably not going to do a whole lot of anything plyometric because they're all running all the time. So plyometrics are going to be non-existent for the most part. And I'm going to get as far away from the demands they have to go through every day. But, for my post player that's moving slower and, less explosive is probably not the right way to say it, but, they're just not moving at the rates and the speeds and the dynamics of a of a 1 or a 2 or a very skilled 3, a very versatile 3.
Right.
So the 1 and the 2 are going to be doing probably less heavy work, but easier to recover from, right?
Right.
In terms of their volume. So submaximal loads in the speed strength range or the strength speed range, right? Trying to move a heavy weight as fast as you can, or moving a weight as fast as you can and seeing how heavy you can do it are really good tools, and using those submaximal things in season. So I may do, 3 sets of 3, which would normally be 92.5% of your 1 RM with a 5 RM load or a 6 RM load. So that rate of force is a big component for the post player. And then instead of doing some of that quicker, more explosive work, the 1s and the 2s might do a little bit more, grinding strength work, but with lower volume so that they're able to recover from. So again, going to some of the concentric work, but a little bit heavier so that it is opposing the demands that they're getting more of on the court and at practice.
And to help, this guy who asked the question, as well as some others who are probably listening, like, it may sound like you're being vague, although I don't think you are. I think it goes and lends itself to the fact that, everybody is so different, and what you do and what I do is like, you look at the individual and you say, okay, you need this. You're not just a guard, you're a 6'8" guard. You're not just a guard, you're a 5'10" guard. You're playing 10 minutes a game, you're playing 35 minutes a game. You have weak VMOs, you have weak glutes. Like, there's so many variables. It's really difficult to answer that question for this one specific person because there are so many variables to assist. So I appreciate your answer. I think it's a very good answer. Hopefully it answers his question. Real quick, before we get off, please share just one more time. How can folks get a hold of you?
So my website is outlawstrength.com. You can reach me there. You can schedule, coaching consults and schedule online training, personal online training and stuff through there. And in person, if you want to work with me in person, if you're in the area, make sure you stop by the rack just as a coach to appreciate a beautiful facility, or as an athlete, just to see, what a top-notch private facility should look like. Stop in the Rack Athletic Performance Center.
Cool. And for those listening, please check in Friday. My first part of a 2-part series on how to convert your strength into speed. Video will be going on Friday afternoon. The video is already linked on the page. Go check it out. And I hope you can watch it as it premieres this Friday. I think it's the same time that we started at 1:30 Eastern. So thanks, Rob. I really appreciate your time. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We'll see you.